My name's Jim O'Donnell, and I'm with the Taos Land Trust. And just want to thank you all for joining. This is a fantastic turnout. Just a little bit of background on this project. We got a small grant from Cornell Lab of Ornithology this year to help expand both birding opportunities and knowledge in the Taos area, and to do preparation work for bird habitat conservation and data gathering. The goal with this is that it would be we hope this will be a multi-year effort where we're going to work with a number of private landowners and schools and some of you to gather more solid long-term data on bird populations in the area, and to enhance bird habitat in the area, particularly along the Rio Fernando, but not exclusively to the Rio Fernando corridor. And admit some more folks here. So that's where this came from. The plan was that we would do these birding courses in person, live here at Rio Fernando Park. But as we all know, we're all masked up and being COVID safe and trying to stay alive for a couple more months. So we opted for some Zoom classes, and there's going to be 4 courses. Robert has generously offered to design and create the courses and the web tool that we'll use. And then we hope, and this is again COVID dependent, we hope that come the spring we'll be able to host some in-person classes here at the Land Trust for young folks who want to get into birding. And we hope to work with some of you all to maybe mentor or be part of bringing up a younger cohort of participants in birding. So that's the goal here with what we're doing. While we do the course, I'm going to put you all on mute. If you have questions, please send them to me in the chat room. I'll gather them together, and then at the end of each section, so approximately every 15 minutes, we'll take some of the questions and address those, and then we'll do perhaps a little longer question and answer session at the end, so right around 5 o'clock. If you all are interested in, or if any of you are interested in participating in the ongoing work and the ongoing bird monitoring that we would like to do, we want to set up some teams of folks who will do regular monitoring on these different pieces of land that we're looking at. If that's of interest to you, I believe Maya Anthony is on here. And if you could send her your contact information in a private chat, she will take that information down, and we'll add you to our spreadsheet and our information. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert, and we'll get going.
Hey, great. I just want to welcome everybody. Many of you I've gone birding with before. Some of you I haven't, but many of you I have. And I look forward to the time when we can actually go out and go birding again once this distancing thing is behind us. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I think you should still be able to see me. Are you still seeing me in the upper corner there? And here's our agenda for the day. And I'm going to go briefly through each one. And this is a little different than your usual lecture in that I do not have a PowerPoint. Everything you see during this talk is going to be available to you on this bird site, the Rio Fernando Wetlands Bird Watching Resources. And you don't have that link now, but before this this evening is over, you will have that link. And it will allow you to have a look at I think, a lot of useful tools. So we'll just start right up. So we're gonna talk very briefly about tools. Talk more about that next week. We're gonna talk about the basic cycle of observation. We're gonna talk about family groupings, a useful way to make sense of the Rio Fernando wetlands list of 146 species. And we're going to talk about seasonal groupings, which I've said is another useful way to make sense out of that list. Because you got to have some way to make sense out of a list of 146 birds, most of which you may not have seen, some of which you may, and many have not. So this is what you'll get to when you'll get to the website later on. This is the I'm just going to refer to it as the RFF, because I can't say Rio Fernando wetlands over and over and over. So the RFF bird watching resources, RFW. So I'm going to assume that there's no, I'm assuming we're talking to a group of beginners, even though I know some of you are not. And we'll cut a pretty narrow path through things, because the way that the course is designed is not that I'm going to sit up here and tell you everything, but I'm going to give you some ideas about how you can use this website to learn some things yourself. So I'll give you some examples and then you can work from there. So let's get started. Tools. So if you can, everybody can see my cursor, right? Nod if you can see my cursor. I can see some, yeah. Okay, so this menu gives you everything you need to get to. So we're going to talk about tools, so we'll go to tools. Now, I am not going to read all of this to you, and we're not even going to talk about it all, but it's something you can read later. I'm going to say this one thing about tools. If you have binoculars now that you can use in any way, great, start using them. Don't go buy something, you know, don't get online and plop down money for a new binocular, particularly if you're an eyeglass wearer. Use what you have for the moment. Field guides, many of you may have field guides. Let me go back. This one, see these two links, Audubon Online Guide to Binoculars and How to Choose Binoculars. That wonderful information. So if you need to buy binoculars or you want to buy better binoculars, read those articles and read what I have to say here. Field guide, many of you have a field guide. If you don't, you can buy them various places, wherever you buy books. But I also want to call your attention to a really good online field guide, which is called All About Birds from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. The Cornell Lab has incredible tools. We're going to be learning a lot about their tools, some today and more as the course goes on. It's a tremendous tool. So there's links here. There's also links over on the eBird and Cornell Lab Suite of Bird Watching Resources page. So you won't have any trouble getting to that. A notebook, something to write with is always good. And maybe some people will want to explore the Merlin Bird ID phone app. It's a very clever device for your smartphone. You tell it where you are, you tell it the main color scheme, you're telling how big it is, and it gives you a selection of birds to choose from. But the thing I really want to stress here is this one, mentors. The learning value of going birds, more experienced birders cannot be overstated. And so once we can have these outdoor workshops, we can do that. But if you're out birding and you see a birder, Ask them what they're seeing. Ask them. They'll talk to you, and you can learn a lot that way. It's very important. Even the most experienced birders learn amazing things when they talk to other birders. So let's move on to the first major topic here. The first topic, observing. I mean, that's what we're doing here. So when you get to this observing section, again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the first section is on slowing down, getting outside, getting into nature. And for me, that's one of the strongest pieces of birding. I may be watching the news, I may be in who knows what kind of a state, but you step out that door and suddenly you're transformed. You breathe differently, and you listen differently, and you look differently. So this section talks about that. The looking and listening sections we'll come back to in just a minute, talk about some specific ideas about that. And then there's studying your field guide, all kinds of things you can do. But let's look at this observing. Is this on the screen for everyone? Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, common cycle in bird watching. What do? You go outside, you look, and you listen. And then you describe what you're seeing and what you're hearing. And then you do it again. And you keep doing it as you try to understand what it is you're hearing, what it is you're seeing. And then what do? Well, you consult a reference. Maybe you whip out your smartphone if you've got a field guide on there, or you get your little Western guide out of your pocket and you look it up and you go, oh, well, maybe I should look for that. And you go back and you look and listen and describe, look and listen and describe. And then eventually you finally figure out, oh, I see, that bird is a spotted towhee. I was back a few years, spotted towhee. And then you document it. So here's some ideas. Look and listen. Notice the details of the bird or its sounds and the habitat. Silently or verbally describe everything in detail. Repeat from the beginning, then consult a field guide. You can read all this, but I think you get the idea. That's what you do. You go out and you look and you listen. Let's take a look at a couple of things about looking. There's some practical ideas here. One of them is this. Once you find a bird, don't look away. You got your binoculars in your hand, you see the bird, you lift your binoculars up and just interrupt your view of sight so that you see the bird. It seems like a simple thing, but you'll lose a lot of birds in the understory if you don't do that. So you can read about it. It says slowly is important. Birds are easily scared. Birds in flight. Your first idea is, I'm going to look at that bird. And the next thing you know is you don't have a sight of the bird and the bird has landed and you don't know where the bird is. So there's very practical things in here like that you can read about. But once you get a bird in view, then you got to describe it. And that is probably the most important point. And I say right here, section on how to identify birds will go over what to look for in great detail. It's common for birders to name the bird as soon as they know what the species is. And there's nothing wrong with that. And if it's the 83rd robin you've seen that day, you're likely to just say another robin. But in the beginning, the value of getting in the habit of describing rather than naming even common species can't be overemphasized. Right away, you could probably say this is an American robin, but did you notice the split white eye ring? Did you notice the color of the bill? Did you notice the white on the belly down here under the famous robin red breast? At any rate, the key to identifying species is usually found in the details. It makes sense to cultivate the habit of describing those details. You might feel silly sometimes, but it's the habit to get into so that you actually look. I will make the conjecture that of those 146 birds on that list, you have probably been in close proximity to most of them at some point in your life. And you have probably heard a majority of them, but you weren't tuned in, you weren't thinking about it, you didn't know. And so it's a habit thing. How do you get in the habit of really paying attention to what you're seeing and hearing? Let's look at a quick thing about listening. I have a number of things about listening. Many birders will report that 80 to 85% of the time you hear the bird before you see the bird. Sometimes you only see the bird because you heard it. It does work the other way around. But let's look at here. A suggestion. Start with whatever you hear regularly near your home. Listen and quietly search for the bird. Seeing it making its sound is the strongest source of learning. If you can't find the bird, just take time to be with the sound. Describe what you're hearing. Quietly mimic the sound. I can't overemphasize this. Just under your breath. What does that bird sound like? It will help you to learn the sounds. So here's a couple of examples and some ideas. Here is a black-capped chickadee. Most of you are probably familiar with that sound. Chickadee is one of those birds that says its name. So when you're out doing these exercises that I've created, if you choose to do them, you might want to try to notate sounds. And it's not as difficult as it sounds. Here's a notation for what we just heard. That little that gargling sound, I've just done it as a little squiggle followed by the DDDs. The traditional mnemonic is chickadee, dee, dee, dee. That would be this, chickadee, dee, dee, dee. Some notation can help you to learn that. Here's another example. Here is the song which we'll start hearing soon. So the song is that two-note thing. You might notate it like this. Da-dum, da-da-dum. When you're close, you might hear those two notes. When you're further away, you may not. So that's an idea of one way to notate. Here's one more. This bird, I'd be very surprised if this is a sound that you haven't heard. Listen to this one. Some people call this the Beethoven bird. One local birder referred to it as chup chup cheese, where the cheese is a trill. And what you'll hear is you may hear as many as 7 chup chups or as few as 2. You might hear chup chup cheese, or you might hear chup 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 cheese, or you might just hear chup cheese, and you will sometimes hear cheese chup chup. And you can even hear chup chup cheese. Lots of variations, but the quality of the voice is the same. If you read this section in here, someplace it will tell you that there's a lot of variations in the song, but the quality of the voice is very constant. It's like if your mother calls up, you don't have to ask who it is. If your best friend calls up, you don't have to ask it is. You know the sound of the voice. And that is a good way to approach these sounds. Here's a quick notation of that. Chup, 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 cheese. Chup, 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 trill. It's an idea. Let's see. Yeah, let's take a couple of questions if there are any.
Go ahead and type any questions you have into the chat room. Right now, we don't have any, but definitely hit us up.
All right, well, I will just take you back over here for a minute to the TLT workshop outlines and exercises. I have exercises here, and some experienced birders may say, oh, I'm not going to do these first two. I encourage you to do them. I really encourage you to go develop the way you listen. Pay attention to the way you listen. So the first one is you take a paper and pencil outside, you make a list of everything you hear and everything you see. Don't get hung up on identifying everything. It's not a race. It's being outside in nature. So go out and connect with nature. Really listen. Listen to bird sounds. You're going to hear sounds and you're going to say, oh yeah, I've heard that before. Well, that's what that is. That's what that here is, that northern flicker making that sound. And then observe through binoculars, describe what you see, try to mimic the whole sound, try to use dashes, dots, squiggles. Those are some exercises you could do if you choose to.
Robert, one question that we have is, do you recommend a certain time of day that is best for birding?
There's two cycles that really shape the birding experience. One of them, of course, is the seasonal cycle, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But the other one is the rotation of the Earth on its axis, right? Because in the morning, birds are more active. Half hour after sunrise is a great time to be out. Doesn't mean there won't be activity later, but early is good. Of course, midday, it usually dies off, but you never know what you might turn up even in midday or in the afternoon lull, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, especially in the summer. The birds are conserving energy. They're not out and about. And then late in the afternoon, you can have some very active times, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, birds get active again. So yes, and then of course, if you want to look at nocturnal birds, you're going to have to go out at night to see owls. Shall we move on? Okay, next topic is families. And we're going to get to that. How are we going to get to that? Oh, we're going to do this. Okay, let me just go back. Wait a minute. You go up to the menu. We're going to go to the photo bird lists section. You'll be able to explore all this to your heart's content a little later. And I'm going to blow up my screen a little bit so this is easier to see, because I want to make a particular point. So what happens with this is you can click on this screen and you'll get a screen that, oh, just a second, let me minimize. I was trying to reduce my size. You click on a bird and you get an informational panel that has pictures of the birds, and it has some data from Rio Fernando wetlands about that bird, has links to some places where you can hear sounds, where you can find more information, link to a range map, etc. But right now, I want to point something out. Here's a list of the 146 birds that we have. And let's look at it first in this alphabetical list. Here, American coot, American crow, dipper, robin, pipit, whatever that is, kingfisher, oops, various, it's a long list of birds. It's 146 long list of birds. And how do you make sense out of that? A kingbird next to a vireo, next to a waxwing, next to a sparrow, next to a teal, a duck. It doesn't help you in learning. It doesn't help you to understand how these birds might be related. So let's go to another list, the taxonomic list. Same birds, same 146 birds, but let's check this out. There we got a goose, a duck, a duck, a duck, a duck, a duck. Now we can start to make sense out of this, right? Let's scroll down here. Oh, doves, rock pigeon, dove, dove, dove. Oh, suddenly things are making sense. Hummingbirds, it's making sense. And let's see what else we have. We have, here we have diurnal raptors and their allies. There's turkey vulture, golden eagle, harrier. So I think you can see the alphabetical listing doesn't serve us in some way, but this grouped in by family somehow does. And that's the main point of this little segment. On this page also, you can see a list of birds grouped by family. So let's say you want to see the swans and geese and ducks. You click on that. Let me reduce the size. Sorry, there we go. And here you see the ducks that appear. There's just the same ones that we listed a minute ago with the same information. Use your back button and let's select the hummingbirds. And there we've got the hummingbirds. You might just want to take a little notice. Oh, they're here in the summer. Oh, they're not here in the winter. That's something you know about hummingbirds. We'll get back to that. So there's all the hummingbirds. You can check that out. And let's look at woodpeckers. And the first thing you do when you start noticing these birds is you start noticing some things. Wow, they all have similar bills. They all have similar bills. Look at that. How interesting. And let's look at another group of birds. Let's look at the wrens. What happened to the wrens? There we go. Interesting. Oh, there's some barring here. There's some similarities there. Oh, barring on the tail, on the top of the tail. So once you start looking at birds from the family view, it starts to change how you look at them. Here's sparrows. Lots of people don't do sparrows. I know lots of birds that don't do sparrows. They just say it's a sparrow. Well, that is a first start, identifying to the family level. Look at the sparrow. Interesting head pattern, bill. Interesting head pattern, similar 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 bill. So the only point I'm trying to make is the usefulness of the family view for trying to start to deal with this long list of 146 birds that you're going to try to identify. So let's take this one step further. Someone might say, well, look, okay, great. Put them in to the families. Well, why don't you alphabetize the families? I mean, this is kind of a pain, right? Why don't you alphabetize them? Make more sense? Wouldn't it be easier if I could just go to the tyrant flycatchers and I could go to the gruiforms? Some of you have seen gruiforms, right? Coots. So here's the answer to that. We're going to get our size back down to actual size. and we're going to go back to the menu. It's always up there in the corner. Just scroll up. It's always back there. If you really get lost, you can always go back home by clicking on the word RFW birdwatching resources. So let's go this time to identifying birds. This is going to be the main center of next week's talk, where we deal with where, when, what, and who. And we're gonna look right now at who, because once you identify a bird, you can talk about, well, who is that bird? What is its life histories? And we're going to look at families, because that's what we're talking about. So what you see at the left, is the same list of birds we were looking at, the same families: swans and geese, upland game birds, things you could eat, hummingbirds, beautiful things, all a whole range. You know what I'm talking about. There they are. Well, let's look at what we might think about those. Species within a family are genetically closely related. Family members have many characteristics in common. So when we're talking about families, we're talking about genetics. You might not be able to distinguish between two different hummingbird species, but you're not going to mistake a hummingbird for a hawk, right? Different families, different characteristics. That's the first major takeaway. So family groupings reflect the genetic background of its members, and at the same time, they provide a tool for learning to identify species. Identifying birds to the family level, it's an important first step. If you can identify things to, whoa, that's a sparrow. Oh, that's a thrush. Oh, that's an icterate. That's a raptor. That's a big deal. That's useful. You can fill in the details later. But now we didn't get to the question of, why don't we put it in alphabetical order? Well, there's a very good reason for that. The list appears in taxonomic order. It's because of genetic relationships, and this is the key. All the bird families share a common ancestor somewhere along their evolutionary path. That makes them all cousins. The evolution of separate species takes time. Thus, the order of families in this list and in most field guides roughly follows the order of evolution of the families. Interesting, huh? So when you're looking at this group up here, we'll just take a quick look here. We're not going to get into detail about this. But if you're looking at the first half of the list, you're looking at orders, strains of birds that were in existence as early as 50 million years ago. This later group, 35 million years ago. Too much information for this moment, but that's something you can read about. Passery. So families get you into who that bird is. It helps you identify because you can identify to the family level, and it gets you into understanding some evolutionary relationship between the birds. Questions?
Right now, we don't have any questions, but if you all do have any questions, please do type them into the chat and we'll get them to Robert. And also just remember that part of the goal with these series of workshops and what we're doing here is to try to expand participation in birding in the area and our data gathering. So if anybody is interested in being a mentor or working with us on some monitoring groups, please do drop your contact information to Maya Anthony in the chat.
Along that line, I might just mention, I meant to thank you, Jim, in the beginning. And I don't know if Christina is on here today. Christina Ortez is the executive director. And there's a group of very experienced birders: Steve Knox, Tom Jackman, Bob Friedrichs, John Lay, Jill Wusso, and Bob D'Antonio, Meg Peterson. Those are all people that have been involved in this project at one time or another. And numerous of them were involved in figuring out what to put in this list and what to leave out. If you go on eBird, you'll find out that there's there's 197 species on their list. So we decided to make it 146 to make it a little more understandable, because some of those things were one-off sightings.
Robert, one of the participants wants to know, what is your favorite resource for listening to recordings of different bird sounds?
Ah,
So you
great.
can fill yourself
Yeah, good. Excellent. All About Birds, the site that I showed you in the very beginning under tools, and we'll go to that site in a minute. All About Birds. If you go to All About Birds, you can type in a species. We'll just type in, we'll type in the spotted towhee, since that's what we were, oh wait, they don't allow that here. Spotted towhee. And you will get an extensive bird guide that will, let me spread this out. Oh, I didn't search on that. This isn't, why am I not getting what I'm supposed to be getting here? Let's try a different species. There we go. This is what I was expecting to see. Extensive amount of information, range maps, what they eat, where they breed, how they breed, ID information, life history, maps, more maps, and sounds. And in most cases, you have multiple recordings. You may have as many as 6 or 8 recordings along this side, so you can hear the chords. So it's a great place. It's a really good place to go and listen to sounds. Another place that to go to listen to sounds, it's a little more, I don't know what to say. It's not more difficult, but it's not so readily sorted for you. I'll put it that way. There's this place called Zeno Canto, and it's a crowdsourced let's do spotted towhee here. And you have page after page. It stops at 9 up to 25 pages of recordings from all over by people like you and me. These recordings, some of them on their cell phones, others with more specialized equipment. And those are available for you to download. You can go here and download the sounds. You can listen to them. So that's a good place. But for starters, I think the most, a really solid place is All About Birds. It's an all-around field guide. It has just about everything you need in it.
And Robert, we got 3 questions here real quick. One comes from me, which is there an app that you recommend for bird sounds? So if you're out in the field and you hear something, you're not sure what it is there a good app that you like to use?
I have on my phone, I have the Sibley's Guide to Birds. Okay. There's the Audubon guides. It's talked about in the tools section. And we'll talk about more of it next week in more detail. But yes, you can play sounds. You do have to be careful if you're playing sounds outside, particularly during the breeding season, because the bird is going to think you're a bird and you're bothering that bird. You're interrupting that bird. So you have to take some care with how you play sounds. But any of the Sibley's Guide, the Audubon Guide, National Geographic, all those on your phones, great for sounds.
Okay. And Kimberly asked, are field guides generally in evolutionary order as well? Is that a universal thing?
It is almost universal. There is one field guide that is ordered by morphology. So it like starts with bill shape and goes from there. But almost always it is. Now the problem is that because of all the genetic research that's going on right now, the orders change. They change every year. I use on my website, I use an order that I get from the American Ornithological Society, and each year I update the order because they update it. And so if you have a field guide that was printed 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago, it may be in a different order than ones now. For example, in the list of, we'll go to bird lists this time, and we'll list all species in taxonomic order. In the correct taxonomic order now, here are the Dionaraptors and their allies. And down here, by the woodpeckers, after the woodpeckers are the falcons. Now, in a guide printed 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, the falcons would have been up here. Genetic data puts them down here instead. So it's constantly changing. And of course, it's wonderful because it really tells you what's going on. It's an incredible thing, the ability now to lay out the relationship between the birds. And all of the early work was done on morphology. But it turns out that a bird can evolve to fit a particular habitat, even though it's not genetically related. And so you can have birds that look not so dissimilar, but are not so closely related.
There are also some bird guides that you mentioned, the one that goes by morphology, that go by color. Some of those are available. And when I was just learning birding, that was I found those very helpful to start.
Yeah, if you use the Merlin app that I was speaking about earlier, which we'll talk about more extensively next week, it will ask you, where are you? Or if you have your position on your iPhone, your phone already listed, it'll know where you are. And it'll ask you what size is the bird and what color is it? And it'll ask you whether it was on a wire or in a bush or what. And off of those 3 questions, it'll give you a list of birds. And one of those birds is going to be the bird you're looking at. It almost always turns out to be the case. Yeah.
Last question, and then let's move on. What do you think about BirdNet app that records in the field and then is sent in for ID?
10 years ago, birders would have said, get that stuff out of my face. But smartphones are a reality. And I don't think those kinds of apps are much different than the phone on your smartphone or the compass on your smartphone, or, the two, there's that I'm only scratching the surface of the tools here, and I'm primarily focusing on the tools from Cornell Lab because it's an entire unified suite of tools. Go on the web, there's all kinds of stuff. So BirdNet, I'm aware of it vaguely, but use whatever tool works. There's all kinds of tools out there. Shall we jump into the last topic? All right. So as always, we can go up to the menu in the corner. And we're going to go to migration view. So one way to categorize those 146 birds is by what families they're in, what family groupings they're in. And that's a very useful way. But another very useful way is their migratory status. So what we have here is a map of the Western Hemisphere-ish. And over here, we have some buttons that you can read about to explain if you like. But what the point of this is that at the Rio Fernando wetlands, there are about 42 species that are present all year. Now, that doesn't mean if you go out on a bird walk, you're going to see 42 species that day. If you're an experienced birder, you might see 22, 23 in a 2-hour, 3-hour walk because you know how to detect birds. If you're an inexperienced birder, maybe you'll see 10. Maybe you'll see 12. Maybe you'll get lucky in 15. If you're out for 5 or 6 hours, you might get 30, maybe, if you're really experienced. So during the winter, inside this red box, which is the box that contains the Rio Fernando's wetlands at a given moment in time, we've got this group of 42 species that are present all year. And we've got winter visitors that showed up in the fall and will stay until the spring. So right now, that's what you've got. You've got those 42 and those 15 together. That's 57 species that are probably observable, right? Today, tomorrow, the next day. But in the early spring, things start to happen. And of course, what happens is that some of the transients on their way further north or up into the mountains where we are, they start to come into view. And migrant summer breeders, birds that are going to show up and stay the summer and then leave in the fall again. They start to show up and the winter visitors start to leave. So we're going along there, and in the late spring, there's one day when suddenly you've been seeing the juncos and the white-crowned sparrows, and then the next day you don't see them anymore. And you're not going to see them again until the next winter, because they have moved up north. The transients have moved up there. They're going to breed up here. And then, of course, and the migrant summer breeders that came up from Central America and South America, they're breeding here locally. And then in the late summer again, everything starts to change. They start to move down. And in the fall, they're moving even further, and finally we get back to winter again, that same. And it's like clockwork. And of course, why is it like clockwork? It's like clockwork because it's based on the Earth's orbit around the sun and the 23.5 degree slant of its axis away from the orbital plane, the thing that gives us the seasons. If you don't know about that, if you don't understand how that works, here's a great link to a NASA site that will explain it. It's written for children, so it's real easy to get right to the core of the thing. But it's this slant that does it. That's what gives us the seasons. And the reason it's like clockwork is because we are turning towards the sun and away from the sun. And so the energy available for food production is moving north. And then the available energy for food production is moving south. And then it moves back north. And then it moves back south. And so the birds stay with that place where the food production is at a max. So how does that help us understand these 146 species? Well, one of the ways, and we'll go over here to the when about range maps. Here we have 3 different range maps, 3 different typical range maps. Here is a bird. The purple is a permanent resident. These birds are in this area all year long, these species. Here's a migratory bird. The Rufus Hummingbird spends its winter down in Mexico, migrates through our area. Actually, there's a little more detail. It mostly migrates up the west, breeds up north here, and we see it when it migrates more centrally in July. The American robin, robins also migrate. There are robins in this purple area all year, but in the winter, the ones that bred way up here scrunch down into the purple area and the blue area. So that's why we get those very dense flocks of robins in the winter. You can have, during migration, you can have 100, 200, 500 robins in a flock together. So the range maps will help you. And next week, we'll talk about in detail how the range maps serve to help you limit your ID. You're trying to figure out a bird and you don't know, and you've got 30 possibilities. You got 22 hummingbirds to choose from. Well, the range map can break it down to 2 migrants and 2 summer breeders. That changes the whole identification process. Well, let's look a little more at range maps. In this section, there is one on bar charts, and we're going to look at bar charts. But for right now, we're just going to go to the eBird bar chart for the Rio Fernando wetlands. We're going to go over to bird lists, and we're going to click here on the eBird bar chart for Rio Fernando wetlands. This is a bar chart that was derived from sightings. My sightings that I've put on eBird are included in this list. Any sightings that you make at Rio Fernando wetlands or in that corridor will show up in this. Any sightings you make in Taos County will show up. If you're in Rio Arriba County, any sighting you put on eBird will show up in the Rio Arriba County list. So let's go to this list. Right away, we get this incredible list and some things start to jump out. Here's a cinnamon teal. Look at that. It's not here in January, February, or March. Starts showing up in April. Must stay here and breed. It's got to breed sometime. And then it's here till October, and then it leaves. There's a migrant summer breeder. Here's a mallard. Oh, it's here, and it's pretty common. Here's another summer breeder. In fact, here's the Rufus Hummingbird we were looking at. Here's a summer breeder. This is the black-chinned hummingbird, comes in the spring, breeds here, leaves in the fall. Same with the broad-tailed. Here's a Rufus Hummingbird. It goes up the West Coast, breeds up in Oregon, and comes back here to terrorize the broadtails and the black-chins at the feeders in July and August and September before it heads on down south. Here's a Virginia rail, another summer breeder. It's a very powerful tool. Turkey vultures, only here in the summer. Let's see if we can find a bird that's most only here in the winter. There must be some. Where might we need to look? There's one. Oh, well, it is here in the winter. It's not very common, but it's not here in the summer. We'll look at this in a different way, but you see this is available. And this, look at this thing. This was updated 10 hours ago. 10 hours ago. So if I had gone for a bird walk at Rio Fernando yesterday and entered my data, it would be included in this data. It's pretty astounding, pretty astounding. So I want to show you a different view of that same data. This is the same, very same data, but it's depicted in a little different way. Don't worry about reading it. Don't worry about any of that. What you're seeing here, these are the all year birds. Those are the most common ones. Now we get into less common. Now we get into uncommon. And then we get into the rare ones. But they're all birds that are here all year. Then we get into the winter birds. The common ones, dark-eyed junco, white-crowned sparrow. Less common ones, down to the rare ones. Then we get into the transients. Again, we have birds that are here just during the migrations. They don't breed here. I know you're going to say, well, that one looks like it bred here. Well, there's also non-breeding birds among the birds. So there's a reason for that. And then we get into the summer migrant breeders. And there they are. They're only here in the summer. So those bar charts are a really good thing to explore. They can be very helpful in helping you to understand those bird lists and to know what to expect. So if you're going to start learning the birds in your area, whether you're talking about the Rio Fernando area or someplace else, where do you start? Start with the common birds. Learn the common birds of the year round. Learn the common winter birds. And then when spring comes, start focusing on the common transients. Start focusing on the common summer breeders. If you go to someplace, where are we? If you go back somewhere, here we go. If you go back here and go to photo bird lists or bird lists, you can go to the season and abundance. You want a list of the year-round birds that are commonly here? Boom, there it is. And you'll see the common, the ones that are here commonly. And you'll see what families are missing in the year-round birds and so forth. And you can do the same for you can see all of the year-round birds, you can see the rare ones, the migrant summer breeders, you get the idea. It's a powerful little tool that will explore. So there's really two takeaways from this talk. The main takeaways, there's three. The first main takeaway is go out and listen like you've never listened before. Go out and look in a way that you may not have looked before. Look for details, look for the general patterns. Look and see how you can notice a bird way off at the top of a tree or on a mesa a long ways away if it's a big bird. Second thing, think about the family relationships. They'll tell you things that are similar about those birds, and it'll help you to start fitting birds into a category. And the seasonal information will help you to limit the birds that you're trying to consider when you're trying to figure out what that bird is you're looking at. If it's the middle of winter and you think, oh boy, this looks like some warbler. Well, look at the range map of the warbler and you'll see, no, not the warbler. Or go look at the bar chart. All of those things help you to limit and to limit the number of birds you have to consider in a particular identification. Now, I'll just leave you with this. There are these exercises. I encourage you to do them all, do some of them, do whatever you feel like. But I think you'll find them valuable. And remember the cycle. Look and listen, describe, repeat, consult references. Consult references. Take your field guide to bed with you in the evening and sit there and read it. get an idea of the order, get an idea. That's I think I've done my spiel.
So Robert, we have several questions that are all directly related to each other.
Okay.
And that is about the impact of climate change on both the number of birds and the type of birds and the time of year that they're moving through here. So all the questions that I got touched on those different aspects. So basically, you said when migration's happening, it's like clockwork, but how is that clock shifting with climate change?
A lot of the clockwork is based on day length. So some of it is not shifting. So the birds tend more often than not to go ahead and move based on day length. If you put migratory birds in a cage, when the calendar gets around to the right day, they start orienting themselves in the cage for migration. This is a kind of study that's been done. What's happening with climate change is that we're getting disconnects between the timing that's happening with the birds migrating and the timing that's happening with the food sources in places. So birds may show up at some particular beach where for millennia, they've been eating a certain crab that hatches at a certain crab and at a certain time. And now they're showing up and the crab hatched earlier, or the crab is hatching later, and you have problems in that way. There's also changes in the ranges. So if you go to my website, Rio and Boodle Birds, you can read about the progression of the white-winged dove up the Rio Grande over the last half century, probably a century, sorry. I think I've got data going back, I think the data starts in 1919 or something like that. I can't remember offhand. The birds are expanding north, certainly due to climate change. It's happening with numerous ranges. So we'll talk more about that in the last workshop when we're talking about bird habitat. We'll talk about that in more detail. Right now, if you go on the website to look at what we'll talk about in the fourth lecture, which is the part on habitat and habitat restoration, you'll mostly see something that says this will be developed by the fourth workshop. So, but is that a good enough answer?
I think so for now. For the upcoming, the 3 more workshops that we have, they're all on Mondays at this same time, and it's using the same Zoom link as we used today. So you can just go back to that link to join for the next workshop coming up next Monday at 4 p.m. So are there any other questions before we close out? All right, in the chat, I put actually Kiva, thank you very much, because I seem to get the link wrong several times. Kiva put the link to the web page that describes the overall project that we're trying to achieve with in conjunction with Cornell. So if you want to take a look at that, that'll help out. So yeah, thank you guys.
So one more thing, I've just now, as we speak, I am uploading the link to this website, to the bird resource website. I just now did it. And so on rioandboodlebirds.org, it'll give you both of those links as well.
Okay, and I've recorded this workshop, so if anybody wants to revisit it, I'll have it loaded to the Taos Land Trust website in a day or 2.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for your attention. And At some point this week, the outline and exercises for the next week will show up and you can start reading. I just encourage you to, the next episode is episode. That tells you where we're at. The next episode is on this title that you saw, which says where, when, what, who, and why. So that we'll get into that thing. And that we're going to get into the core of how do you really get down to identifying these birds.
Thanks
All right.
everybody for joining, and hope to see you all next Monday.
I'll be here.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.